Yeah, so a lot of survivors are born into this cult, which is basically a satanic cult that is spread all over the Western world. I think my mother was targeted, and my mother was not well mentally. I say she was a psychopath. I think that's what she is. At 9 years old, I ended up being trafficked into that core group of power. And then I was going to be killed because of him also, in front of him. And he was just laughing.
The Drazzy Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Drazzy Show. I'm your boy Drazzy. Today I have a very special guest with me, and she goes by the name of Anneke. Anneke, how are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Could you please explain to me and the audience the main thing that is so fascinating about your childhood?
Well, thank you. Well, I am one of several survivors of elite abuse that are speaking out. So this organized abuse, if you will, that involves some extremely elite perpetrators. So it sort of raises the stakes on every level. So speaking about this abuse, it's not only the family that breaks apart, but it also has some other consequences. So it took me 30 years of healing really before I felt ready to speak out, before I felt strong enough. And I have started to speak out. I've also published a book, my memoir called Quest for Love. You know, it's a memoir of a child sex slave. So basically there you have in the title what my childhood was like.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the very short overview.
How old were you when it happened, and who put you into that kind of environment?
Yeah, so a lot of survivors are born into this cult, which is basically a satanic cult that is spread all over the Western world. And then through the cult, let's say through the secret societies and the satanic groups, they connect with people that are more powerful in larger cities and ultimately other countries and so forth. And so for me, it was different. I came from the outside. That is to say, I think my mother was targeted, and my mother was not well mentally. I say she was a psychopath. I think that's what she is. And basically, she was married when I was 3 years old, so we had a very big change. We moved to a new place. I was learning a new language also. This is in Belgium. And we had a cleaning lady that came to work for us. And she offered my mother to take me. And I just had a half brother. My mother had a baby with her husband. And so she was very happy to have these people take me. So it's this cleaning lady and her husband took me on outings every weekend, or not every weekend, but they took me regularly. They took me swimming also regularly. They taught me how to swim. And there were always other children. They were from Holland. And they used to say that those children were their nieces and nephews, but they were revolving. So they were never the same children. So I never also got a chance to get very close to those other children. And after a year of this grooming, that's to say, I think I should say they were grooming my parents. I didn't really like them ever. And I didn't want to go, but I had to. And after a year, they first took me to what could only be called an orgy. And I was abused horrifically there. And it was in a castle in Belgium. And I tried to tell my mother, and then she ended up somehow taking me there herself. And she became my driver, driving me to, or pimp really. She acted like a pimp, taking me to anything that was requested. So it could be maybe sometimes during the day for like one person in a house, or it could be in network orgies or parties where young children were sort of the last step for the people that were being indoctrinated into that system. The leader of that group in Belgium was the then Minister of National Defense. His name is Paul van den Boeinant. He was also prime minister twice in Belgium. He had a very long-standing political career. He was never caught for any of those charges, although he is named by many survivors. He was the boss, and he was working together with the royal family, as well as other aristocrats. And then he used the children to then connect with people in the global network. And that is how I ended up at 9 years old. I ended up being trafficked into that core group of power of the people who were very visible on the world stage back then. This is 1972 when I was 9, but also people behind the scenes, but who were just pulling the strings, like you could say, of power. And then I was trafficked sort of around the Western world, and all the events that I attended was pretty much mostly in extremely wonderful, beautiful areas and places, the castles and beautiful villas and so forth. Sometimes I was taken to bars also, but most of the time they were exclusive exclusive properties. And I was being I was being mind control trained. So I was sent to Germany after this one very famous, person from a very big family that everyone recognizes the name right away. I was singled out, and I was going to be trained, mind control trained, that is, in Germany. And I was for a month, and this is torture-based mind control. So it's torture is administered to the child, and I was 9. Mostly children are younger, and that state of extreme trauma then creates the possibility for the mind to go completely blank at some point when the pain becomes too much. And then anything can be programmed in that blank state. And then the things they wanted me to do was related to spying, basically, working as a sex slave, but spying on other wealthy and powerful men for my then owner, letting him know what they liked sexually, or letting him know what their weakness was, or anything at all that might be of interest to him, so he would have a political or a business advantage over these men. But he also really liked the idea of just having that control behind the scenes and controlling me as a sex slave then. And then I was being prepared to become famous in France, to be an entertainer. And so I would belong always to my owner, who was an American billionaire, and I would belong to him, but behind the scenes he would be controlling me. And then with that platform, I would be better able to reach the most powerful men in the world and have them fall in love with me. That was the idea. So after a year of that training, I was then just 10 years old. Let's just say that what I had to do to belong, this happens to the children in this cult, could call it SRA, for satanic ritual abuse or mind control. After a year, from the beginning, really, I had been made to do things also. And the children being made to do things is a very common way to get indoctrinated, to feel that either you're so guilty you'll never speak up because you feel that you're the guilty one, or that you become part of it. And of course, the idea was for me to become part of that group. And after a year, I had enough. And I spoke out and was then, you could say, violently rejected out of the inner circle, and then reprogrammed in the most horrendous way. I won't be graphic about it, but to make sure that I would never be successful. I was all groomed to become successful in France and to become a singer and actress in France. And so they had to make sure that I was never going to feel that I was deserving of that success. And I was reprogrammed for that. And then ultimately I ended back in the Belgian network. And then I begin my book really in that last year when I was in the Belgian network, but after having been trained as a, let's say, high profile sex slave, and then meeting someone, a young gangster, who was just being brought into that network in Belgium, who rescued me when I was 11 years old and made a deal. He made a deal for my life with the boss, the Minister of National Defense, Paul van den Boeynants. That really got me out, and that ended up costing him his life. But it got me out at age 11, and I never went back.
So why did this guy make a deal? Was he sexually involved with you? Was he raping you as well, or did he just take a liking to your personality? Because he knows that would be, he knew with the kind of people we're talking about. We're talking about elites. We're talking about the highest of highest in society. You know, he knows the secret society. Why would he risk his life to save you?
Yeah, so it was a moment of what they call weakness in the network. He had been raping me for a year. And there was also a very deep emotional connection. He was only 20, let's say. I was 10, but he was 20. So he was still, that child self was still somewhat present, I'd say. And his own sense of, he was honest in certain ways. He was also very violent. So he actually was also very violent with me. And then I was going to be killed because of him also, in front of him. The torture that was to end my life started in front of him, and he was just laughing. But I challenged him. I guess, defied him, which is the first thing that attracted him to me a year earlier, my defiance. And he then went, and somehow his feelings were reignited. Mm. And then he went and made a deal to save me, which meant that he was going to work for this politician as his left-hand man, kind of. And then some zealous cops accidentally, you could say, got on the track of this gangster, this very gangster who was working for him. And then the gangster ended up getting caught, and then ended up dying in prison right before his of supposed suicide, right before his trial.
Wow, sounds like Epstein.
Yes, similar. Oh, wow. In Belgium, small Epstein and small.
Small Epstein. But there's one thing I wanted to ask you, and the question I want to ask you was, so where was your father, your biological father, and also your stepfather? Did he not have a say when your mom was pimping you? Didn't he say, what the hell are you doing to your daughter? And on top of that as well, didn't your father wonder where you were? Your biological father, sorry?
My biological father had a one-night stand with my mother. And she did tell him that she was pregnant. He offered an abortion. And then that was the last conversation they had. So he was not involved. He didn't know, but he knew that I existed. But I actually met him when I was 18 years old. And it was helpful to meet him and to learn about my heritage. But he was not a father, never was, and was never interested in being a father. And my stepfather let my mother do anything she wanted with me and didn't want to get involved, and had sort of he was an enabler for sure. He was extremely passive, but he was even more passive with regards to me because I was not his daughter. So he felt that she came with me. He married when I was 3. He married my mother when I was 3. So he kind of let her do whatever she wanted. He was also gone a lot. He was away a lot for work for months at a time. But when he was there, and he had every chance to see, and I described that in my book, actually, I tried to also just tell him one time, and then his denial, which was extreme anyway, turns into victim blaming, where he basically says he doesn't believe me. And of course, when I say I try to talk to my stepfather, I try to talk to my mother. I was 6 years old or 8 years old or whatever. When I was 6 years old, when I tried to talk to my mother, it's not as if I was telling them I was taken to an orgy where I was raped and humiliated. I was obviously didn't have that vocabulary. I was just trying to say that bad things had happened, or with my stepfather, it was a specific situation. I tried to tell him that my mother was lying about it because she had made up a story that was obviously, to justify my absence. I had been gone for 5 days. So I just tried to tell him it wasn't true, and he didn't believe me. So, yeah, so my mother was very active, but she was very secretive. She kept a lot of other secrets from him as well, but he allowed it, and he closed his eyes, and it was very willful the way he did that. It takes a lot of work to be that blind.
How did you get to the stage where you were allowed to talk about this? Because if these people are elites, they are secretive, and at one point they were going to kill you, why would they allow you to go out there, survive, and have so many secrets come out?
Well, I'm not allowed to speak at all. And of course, since I've been public, so I was rescued in 1974. And during my 5 years in the network, it was made very clear to me, I was threatened very graphically. I witnessed murders. I was made to commit murders. This was all to make sure that I would never speak. I was also told, because these are people in the government, that whomever I would speak to, whomever I would if I ever would try to say anything to anyone, they would make sure that that person was punished or killed, and that not just they would find out and I would be punished or killed, but whomever I involved, whomever I would try to tell, they would be punished or killed.
So far,
But
sorry to cut
yeah,
you.
but at age 11, sorry.
Sorry, Anneke, sorry to cut you. So they said whoever you speak to will be found and killed, yeah? I'm speaking
Or
to you.
punished, yeah, whatever that means. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm speaking to you, right? And I've seen several interviews. Have those people been punished? Have they been killed?
Well, it always depends on what they can do and what they can get away with it. This was 1974 that I was rescued. And then they left me alone. In fact, I think they might have thought that I was dead, because the gangster who wanted to rescue me and made that deal put me in a situation that I ended up physically dying. I had a near-death experience. And when I came to, there was no one left in the room but the gangster. So I don't even know if he ever told anyone that I was still alive or not. But either way, I was free, completely free. And of course, I didn't speak out. And when I started to speak to a therapist, I was so afraid. I didn't remember also, this, I was told to forget, but I also had been dissociated so much anyway already. So there was always, even when I was in the network, there were at times when I was going to school, for example, I didn't know anything. Or it was actually the gangster in the last year, he asked me questions from before, and I started to remember things because he asked me. And so there were certain things, when they started to come back, I didn't believe it. When I was in my 20s, I had flashbacks, but I didn't believe. I had no context for this. I thought, this is crazy. I'm crazy. I don't know what's happening to me. It took a long while before I could put it in a context. And in 1996, the Dutroux case happened in Belgium, which was sort of an international case, where it looked like the network in Belgium was going to be exposed, because one pimp had been kidnapping children, and they ended up finding 4 bodies of children and rescuing 2 little girls from dungeons in Belgium. So everybody suddenly knew about the network, and everyone was on board. And then 8 years later, that's how long it took for this case to go to trial. It became one man, and everything relating to the network was cut off the case. 30 people died who were ready to testify about the network. And it was a massive, massive operation to shut everything down that was successful in Belgium. So, but meanwhile, I had my context, and I started to just remember more and more. So most of that happened, first of all, I felt safe because I wasn't even on the same continent as where most of this stuff had happened, even though I had also been brought to the United States. And then, I didn't think to speak publicly at all. I didn't want to. In fact, during the Dutroux case, they were asking people to come forward, which I didn't really quite know that because I wasn't living in Belgium. But there was I didn't even consider that for any reason. I didn't feel ready. And it took another 15 years or so. I mean, I came to a place in my healing. Now I've been healing over 20 years already, where it's just like, well, I'm not answering certain questions because I'm avoiding talking about this. Now that I don't like. I don't like to not say something because I've been threatened to not say it. So I started to just speak about it in the context of the work I was doing, which was I was working in prisons. I was bringing yoga into prisons, and I was leading a nonprofit organization doing that in New York City and state. So the reason why I was doing that was obviously related to my own childhood, and that people inside have often similar degrees of violence that they've experienced in life. And they're also, while they're incarcerated, being treated like the lowest of the low, as I was treated in the network. So I related very strongly to their situation. And I just started to talk about it and not answer, rather than, and that's how it started. And then I ended up being asked more and more about that. And in the beginning, maybe more sensational, but I was just saying yes to, I never said yes to everything.
Yeah.
It's certainly a growth journey, how to speak out and what to say. But then as soon as I did start to speak out, I got network interference again.
So you were 11 years old when you were saved, right?
Yes.
So who raised you? Because you're a woman now. You're a highly intelligent woman. I'm having a conversation with you. Your mum obviously was not an intelligent person and she couldn't be trusted. Who raised you into the woman that you are now?
Well, I had to go back to my parents, and the only difference was that my mother couldn't take me to the network anymore, which she tried. She did actually take me back one more time. She also tried to then kill me herself. So after that, she molested me. That was her last big move.
Sorry, your own mother molested you?
Yes, my mother had no boundaries.
So what was your stepdad doing about this? And your stepdad stop her? Was he that passive?
He was that passive. He wasn't there. He wasn't home, but it didn't matter anyway. He had let her do anything and everything previously.
Sorry.
It's not like he was going to do anything about it. But what she did with that was sort of her last move. The reason she was so furious was not just that she couldn't take me anymore. It was that I was aware of everything and I was going against her. So it's this dictator, the dictator, the psychopaths are dictators. So she couldn't allow me to say anything that was not her narrative, which was that she was a perfect mother. So after she molested me, the shame that I felt from being molested by my mother, I felt so ashamed that I just temporarily again went with her narrative and made her good and gave her, she had the power again, and I was her, whatever she needed me to be. And then I left home very early. I was pretty much out of the house at 15. I left school at 15, and at 16 I was living in someone else's place. At 17 I lived by myself, and I had been given very precise instructions by this gangster when he rescued me, how I should live my life. And those were very specific and detailed and were relating to prostitution, drugs, marriage, where I should live. And I followed everything very, very carefully. So from 16, I've been independent.
Another question I wanted to ask you, what did your life become like? Did you ever marry? Did you ever have children? What was intimacy like for you? Did you ever feel comfortable around sex? Like, this must have traumatized the point where you weren't too sure who's real and who's not real, right?
Yeah, I definitely have never healed that part of no. So when I was younger, I was completely dissociated during sex, and it was like I was not there. It's like I was not present for it. So I started practicing yoga but I was 30 already, but that brought me back into my body. My life was very much determined by those directions I was given by the gangster. Not engaging in prostitution, at 16 years old, I was in the Red District in Antwerp. I would have become a prostitute, but except I didn't because of those directions. So I was saved. And obviously, you don't last if you don't sleep with men. Not to become addicted to drugs. I mean, it's very big. The directions were, you can take drugs when they're given to you, but you can never do anything to get them, and you can never buy them. So there, it doesn't leave much, does it? So I haven't really been able to. But those were the natural traps that I would have definitely fallen into early on. And then he also said that I should move from Belgium, that I should leave Belgium, that I should move to, and he said London, Paris, New York. So I lived in all three places, and I'm still in New York.
Did you ever marry?
And he also told me I should marry a man, not an older man from who had made his own fortune, but I should marry someone my age from a wealthy family. And he added, preferably a family of New York bankers. And that was my husband.
A New York banker?
Yeah.
Did your husband know about your past? What happened to you?
Well, I didn't really know about my past when we met. I mean, it was all very vague. I had not really found the real story there. It was still flashbacks and so forth. I knew about sexual abuse. I mean, I had recovered quite a few memories, but the flashbacks of the network, I never found a therapist who was willing to work with it. So I couldn't really go anywhere with it. So it wasn't also that conscious in my mind, like I have survived this. I didn't even have a name for it either. So, but when I was married, and because of the situation that I was in through that marriage, I ended up being able to go to therapy a lot and also go to yoga a lot and focus on healing. So that's what I did. And then I found a therapist finally who was open. And then I was able to really work through a lot. And then, so it was during the marriage, and it's also, the marriage didn't survive because of it. Yeah.
You're the first person I've ever met that has been a victim of a satanic ritual. I've heard about these things, but I've never met anyone that's been through it. And what I want to know is, how did you know they were satanic? Because you were quite young. They could have just been a bunch of pedophiles that wanted to have sex. How did you know it involved, I don't know, dark forces or Satan?
Well, the first years I didn't know, and because I think that in Belgium they were a bunch of pedophiles, and not just pedophiles, they were also having sex with other people. That's why they were not calling themselves pedophiles. They were calling themselves stretching the boundaries of sexuality or whatever, But when I was 9, I was subjected to a satanic ritual. Now that's very specific. People were wearing black hoods. It was happening in the basement of a large church, a vaulted basement of a very large church. There was an ancient altar on which a child was sacrificed. And that was done. I was only there because I was being raped. And the people who were involved in that, there was a master of ceremony, so it was religious, but it was also like you could cut the energy and the pain of the little boy, his screams. Those people, it got them excited and angry at the same time. And so they were more violent. And I was being raped, so this man, he got off on that. They got off on the, that's sort of, again, it's a cover for sadism. And I came across a lot of sadists. Some were not satanic. They were aristocrats in Belgium, extremely sadistic people who also killed children. But they weren't doing it in that context of the ritual with the hoods, with the literally pointed hoods, or other hoods, but they were black robes they were wearing. And they were naked, you know, this man, he was naked underneath that robe so he could rape me. And they have this belief, so they want us to all be atheistic, and they want us to believe only in the physical. But they believe that killing doesn't mean anything because the soul, the consciousness isn't going to die. So that soul is just going to be reborn. Now, I believe that also, but it doesn't mean it's okay to kill. But they justify it. Like, I think when you're a psychopath, like eventually nothing means anything anymore. And so you have a lot of people doing it, and they get the power, the money, the prizes, the yachts. And so it seems like it pays off. It pays off in the world to engage in those things. It pays off.
So you said earlier that you'd been made to commit some murders. Do you feel that, I mean, are you a religious person? Do you believe in God?
I do.
Do you feel that God will believe it was your hand that committed the murders, or do you think God will understand that your hand was forced?
Of course, God understands. I mean, I felt God very much, or let's say a benign, loving presence in the worst moments in the network as a child. And then, of course, in the near-death experience, it was a very beautiful experience I had. And it was about that too, because I was made to kill in the mind control training. As part of the mind control training was the phase where you're trained to kill. And then it's done in a way so that you know that there's no way out. You cannot not do it. If you don't do it, it's worse for the victim. So you feel like you do it out of mercy. You have to do it, or else it's going to be worse for the victim. So then it says it just only leaves you to do it. So then you want to do it, and you want to do it as quickly and effectively as possible. And then that has people tell you that you're really good at it. But before leaving the network, so when this deal was struck, the deal was that I had to go through what they call an exit ritual. That is to say that I had to kill a child. And again, I was 11 years old, and I knew very well that that was the last thing on earth I wanted to do. But I also knew that if I would say no, that it would be worse for her. So having gone through that experience, putting myself in that state in order to be able to do it, and then going through it, and then I died myself. And in the near-death experience, you know, I needed that experience of bliss and being shown. I was greeted on the other side. And this is what I'm supposed to learn in this life. That no, my hand was forced. I would never have done it of my own, but also for my personal journey, it was also very important that I learn to understand the worst criminals on earth, which is those who harm and kill children. That I find understanding even for those people, as I'd gone through it myself, even though my hand was forced, having gone through the experience, allows me to really understand it. Even though my loyalty and my affection is always with the victims, of course. Nevertheless, find understanding. I think if we seek understanding, even for the vilest criminals, that helps us to change this problem.
Wow. But Anneke, I'm gonna cut the interview. But before we do, is there anything you want to add?
No, I'm grateful to speak. I'm grateful people are listening, and I'm grateful for you for having that openness to want to see the world the way it is and to be willing to face the darkest of truths.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you
Same
very
here.
much, Anneke. Have a lovely day. Okay.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Guys, thank you very much for watching the Drazzy Show. That was Anneke. Please make sure you check out her book. The link will be in the description. And please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Take care. The Drazzy Show.
The Drazzy Show.